Guys, it's Lost in Plot, and we're back to talk about Season 1 of Halo over on Paramount Plus there. And before we get into it, let's start with a quote from one of the showrunners for this awful, terrible first season of Halo. So early on, we were thinking about doing something that could tie very closely with the game. What we were finding was trying to verbatim stay with everything that had come before wasn't serving the medium. It also wasn't serving the creative teams and their need to express a story and build the world through their eyes. And boy, I really wish you hadn't said that, partner, because this is a damning piece of interview material that's come up over and over and over. It's probably the most searched article that comes up when anyone is looking to find out more about the Halo series on Paramount Plus. And the reason was, I'm generally okay with that when you're adapting something from one medium to another medium. So obviously a first-person shooter is not going to have enough of a compelling, interesting story to carry over into a series. There's not going to be enough character exploration or development, anything like that you typically get in a narrative sense to expand on a multi-season series like this. So I was okay with that. Through the first episode and through the pilot for Halo, I actually enjoyed it. The problem is, if you're going to move away from the story that they gave you in those games, what you're doing can't be a megaton of shit. It can't be that. It's got to be a bit better than that, buddy. A bit better than that. And unfortunately, that's what we get in this first season of Halo. Every time they stray away from the video game narrative to follow their own creative, chart their own creative path, their own creative desires, they utterly fail. They fail miserably here. So they actually do, in the worst episode of the entire season was they tried to build all these characters because they understood that we can't have a series based around Master Chief and Halo if we can't create other interesting characters around the Master Chief. Obviously, everyone wants to see the Master Chief. We need to create deep, complex, compelling characters around him. And they fail miserably every time with every character. The biggest one that I think they give the most screen time to is Dr. Catherine Halsey, who they paint as the villainous bad guy. She stole children when they were young. She cloned them. She gave clones that had an expiration date and died a year after they were returned to the parents. So the parents thought that their kids died. Meanwhile, she takes the kids and turns them into Spartan super soldiers because she's trying to get rid of the emotion and the humanity of an individual to reach humanity's full potential, which is kind of a robotic super soldier, apparently. That's what she's after. That's what she thinks. Now, aside from the performance being terrible, and most of the performances from everybody in this cast are below average. They are below par. They're just not getting it done. She fails to ever be a compelling villain or a compelling character, and all of this first season is really built on her and what she's done and uncovering the truth about how she manipulated all these Spartans, and we don't care. We don't give a shit. So is what you're showing me when they take off the helmet and we try and find more about the humanity of Spartans, is that more interesting and more fun to me than just watching them get into massive, spectacular firefights with the Covenant in this war where the alien race wants to completely annihilate and commit a mass genocide against humanity? Which one am I going to be wanting to watch there? The self-exploration of the Spartan Superstar or the giant war thing, which is Halo, and that's what I expect from Halo. But you're not delivering on what Halo should be. And that's why I think everybody is really rejecting this series, and it gives you some of the worst moments you can possibly imagine. It gives you scenes like this. Yeah, that's Master Chief with his helmet off. His clothes off too. He's about to have a love scene. Is that what you always wanted when you were playing the Halo games? You said, oh God, the story would have so much more if Master Chief could have a love scene with some weird character here. Wouldn't that be just emotional and compelling? And oh man, that would really bring me into it. No, it's terrible. It's really, really awful. And every creative choice these showrunners make is garbage. And there's going to be new showrunners. Whether there's going to be a second season or not, it's hard to say. Now, if we get back to the story of what Halo Season 1 was meant to cover, this is before the events of Reach. So before that narrative thread through the game, it goes back to the original Halo trilogy, of course, and it goes before that, before even the destruction of Reach, because Reach is where we've based so much of this season. Now, they do try and introduce these supplemental characters, Quan, and she's got a whole really stupid backstory about her homeworld of Madrigal that never goes anywhere, and in fact, every time they break the narrative to go off and follow her character and what she's doing, the show completely just falls apart and is boring and loses everyone because the acting is terrible and the writing's awful too. When we come back to Master Chief's storyline, it's a little bit better because we've got our antagonist, the Covenant, or at least it should be, but they even pull away from the Covenant and then they're focusing more on Dr. Halsey and everything she did with the Spartan program, and again, you're falling away. You're falling into despair. Just utter narrative destruction here because the Covenant, your big conflict that it was going through the Halo games is missing. It's absent. We know we're going to get there eventually, but that's where we are. We see the Covenant, at least initially, but the whole season is basically a MacGuffin hunt for these keystones that will reveal the location of the Halo ring and win the war. Find the Halo, win the war. So we spend a lot of time with the Spartans taking off their helmets, reflecting on their past lives and what made them these super soldiers, talking about these keystones and other stupid things instead of getting out of that conflict with the Covenant. So we see very little of that because they're going off to follow their own creative instincts, like we heard in the quote, to follow down that rabbit hole and give us a whole lot of just really boring, poor storytelling. And it gets worse with the finale when we see the awful CGI. It seems like they just blew their budget and they had to get to the finale and they had no money left to do those CGI shots. Terrible. The acting and the performances, even by Pablo Schreiber, who plays Master Chief, by the end of the season, everyone looks awful. Everyone looks pathetic. Everyone probably wants to scrape this one off their resume. And it's too bad because I really wanted it to be successful, and so did Paramount Plus. Really wanted it to be good, and I believe that there is a very good story to Halo. I think even if you just played the story verbatim from the games, like the showrunner said, they absolutely couldn't. If you just did that, you'd have a much more interesting and much more compelling first season, and everyone would be happy. I don't know, maybe there's people out there that are happy with this. I feel bad for you if you are. No one should be happy with this. It was a really pathetic attempt to interpret the story of Halo and the characters of Halo. If you had just stayed true to a lot of the stuff that they were doing, you would have been great. You would have been on solid footing. You could have just told that story and done a little bit more character development of the Master Chief, of Captain Keyes, and some of the other characters from those games. You would have been doing much better. But this is bad across the board. The writing is bad. The acting is bad. The scenes are done poorly. The CGI is bad by the end of it. Like I said, it seems like they just spent all of their budget. And it really puts this franchise in a giant, massive hole that I don't know if they can even dig out of. Now, Steven Spielberg was personally helping with this and was kind of fostering it. And it's been in development hell for something like 8 years. And they finally got it out. And this was the best attempt at it, which is really sad and really pathetic. Because if you did go back to that first Halo game and you say, well, we're just going to tell this story, that's the arc for our first season, and you're looking at these characters, what would be interesting to explore? What would be interesting to explore about Master Chief? And I don't know if you want to explore that much about Master Chief, because I think the easiest low-hanging fruit was to go into, oh, well, he was taken as a child, and how does he feel about that emotionally once he takes that helmet off? Here's the problem. It's okay if you're going to take that helmet off, but we're getting less because of it. We're getting less. We're getting just a blubbering baby. Master Chief is supposed to be a hero. He's the only thing that you see in your opening credit sequence because he's badass, and we want the Master Chief to be an outstanding hero that we can all get behind. And instead, he doesn't do a whole lot of heroic things in this, and the ending is horrible. The ending is basically Master Chief sacrifices himself to allow Cortana to take control of his body so that she can pick up the keystones and take them away from the Covenant, even though the Covenant has already used them to find the location of the Halo ring, presumably, because it's been revealed to everybody that was there. They still go through this bizarre moment where Cortana is operating the body of Master Chief, and they end the season with one of the other Spartans asking if it's really John 117 in there, or if it's Cortana controlling his body. That's how bad this is. And Halsey lives, and she kind of escapes because she pulls a little twin magic with her clone, so she's still out there. Oh, it's a whole lot of bad for the second season. They just fundamentally don't understand where they should be going with this property and what to do with it. And it's not that hard. Like we said, there's plenty of novels out there, and there's plenty of games and lore to pull from. But, those showrunners have to follow their own creative instincts, and don't you tell them any different. That's what they're doing here, and that's why this first season of Halo is dead at a 2 out of 10, almost a 1 out of 10. And that's a shame, because there was potential here, and I think it's a great property that can do some really interesting good things, but not with these showrunners and not with any of these clowns involved in this. Like, you need to just scrap everybody and find a different approach for this. Anyway, that's the end. It's dead. Season 1 of Halo. Who even knows if there's really going to be a Season 2? And if there is, they got to make some serious changes. If you like this review, make sure that you like and subscribe. Leave us some comments down there if you actually sat through the entire season of Halo like I did and suffered through it. Let me know your thoughts there, because we are going to see you guys on the next one.